What's up, US History people? This is Mr. Norris.
And Mr. Lawrence.
We are joining you today talking about video number 2 for the Progressive Era, Rights of African Americans. So make sure you're on this page in the packet, and let's get going. All right, the decades after the Civil War were a difficult time for African Americans. Laws prevented them from exercising their right to vote, specifically men at this time. Remember, women are not yet allowed to write. Mr. Lawrence, what Reconstruction Amendment gave African American males the right to vote?
All right, Reconstruction Amendments. Let me think here again. Oh, I remember something. Free citizens vote. So ending slavery was 13. Establishing citizen was 14. So I'm saying the 15th Amendment?
I think you're correct, and I think everybody should right now write down 15 and put a circle around it on the top of your paper. All right, Mr. Lawrence, can you tell us about Plessy versus Ferguson? What was the significance of this court case?
Absolutely. Very important court case of this time. So what do we need to know about Plessy v. Ferguson? Well, this case established or upheld the idea of separate but equal. So it really gave a constitutional support to the idea of segregation, specifically in the South. So this really allowed Jim Crow laws to exist for as long as they did.
And you mentioned Jim Crow laws. Let's talk about Jim Crow laws. What exactly were they? They were legal segregation. So they upheld segregating or keeping blacks and whites separate in the South. So Plessy versus Ferguson upheld the constitutionality of Jim Crow laws. All right, we're going to talk about 4 major figures who fought for rights of African Americans. The first one we learned about before, Mr. Booker T. Washington. So why don't you tell us about him, Mr. Lawrence?
So we said that Booker T. Washington, one of our first civil rights leaders that we've been talking about, but he looks at equality as something that will be gained over time for the African American community. And he looks at it will happen not by necessarily politically demanding or protesting, but through vocational training and skill building in order to be accepted within culture economically.
And vocational is a very important term to know. They will not give you the definition of that on any exam. So know that vocational is basically learning a trade. So opposite of him, we have W.E.B. Du Bois, who got his Ph.D. I remember as W.E.B. got his Ph.D. And he favored educational training for career and also activism. So he wanted higher education for African Americans, and he also was an advocate or favored political activism for African Americans to gain their rights.
All right, another important gentleman during this time period who comes on the scene and really pushing for African American equality is Marcus Garvey. So Marcus Garvey, he has a different perspective on a lot of these issues. It says African American nationalism movement, separatism, and the Back to Africa movement. So Marcus Garvey lived through this discrimination, all these ideas of Jim Crow, and kind of came to the conclusion that if American society wasn't willing to accept him as an equal, then maybe he doesn't want to be part of this system, and really push to maybe having some groups within American society separate themselves. That's why I referred back to Africa. So kind of a different way of looking at this issue.
And we'll talk more about him in the 1920s as well when we get to that time period. And finally, we have Ida B. Wells, or Ida B. Wells Barnett. She was an incredibly influential woman and African American. She led an anti-lynching crusade in the South and was also a co-founder of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is a civil rights organization still around today. So she was a journalist, and she detailed the horrors of lynching throughout the South and wanted to put an end to it. So she was very, very influential.
Mr. Rush, would you consider her a muckraker?
I think so. She's bringing attention to a problem in society. So absolutely, you can count her as a muckraker. All right, that's it for this video. Short one today. In at least 3 sentences in your video response sheet, please identify differences between Du Bois and Washington. If you want, maybe you can even throw in another one of those African Americans that we talked about. Anything else, Mr. Lawrence, before we go?
That's it.
That's it. All right. We will see you next time. Thank you. Have a good day.